Okay, so yeah, the shelter collapses, or the building, the town hall collapses on top of the shelter. The lights go out, everybody's freaking out, and but for the additional explosions that we're going to hear further down the line, that's pretty much the end of the war, and we're moving into the aftermath. And I said this at the top of the video. We're not even halfway through the movie, and we're starting with the aftermath. So I think that was a very intentional choice by the production crew to basically, and I don't want to say this the wrong way, but to basically sternly lecture us about how bad this is going to be, and how we should do everything we can to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's right. Yeah.
and so yeah, we see that we never see Jimmy again, right? He's just gone.
Right. Jimmy, as he starts to run across town to Ruth's house, is presumably taken out by the direct hit on Sheffield. Yeah. The
That would make
industrial
sense.
area of Sheffield. Yeah.
And then, well, I don't want to get too far ahead.
Well,
So
his
we'll
friend, yes, his friend. Yeah, we'll talk
right,
about
right. But he just stayed under the truck
under
then.
the
I
truck. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and I guess we should say that we should explain what the hell we're talking about.
Okay.
I can't remember his name now. Oh my goodness.
Oh, he says it once. Jimmy's friend. He just says when he meets Ruth, Jimmy's friend, and I've seen the film so many times, and I still don't.
Bob.
Bob. Okay. Bob. Jimmy's friend.
Bob,
Yeah.
Jimmy's mate. That's what it was.
Jimmy's mate. Yeah.
Uh, so okay, so yeah, that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition. You have the guy that stays behind and lives, and then the guy that was trying to go forward and doesn't make it. Um, and then you have Ruth is surviving in the basement with her mother, her father, and her grandmother.
Mhm.
And you can't predict how you would act or react. But man, I think that if I were a septuagenarian plus, that I don't think I'm going into the shelter, man. I don't see how that's a net positive for anybody.
Well,
And it
remember,
certainly didn't work out for the grandmother who doesn't.
no, no. But I wanted to say there is such an undercurrent, both in the real world through the civil defense and just in the popular imagination, an undercurrent of World War II history and the Blitz.
Yeah, yeah,
And so when you're looking at someone of that age, I believe that it would be assumed that she just doesn't can't imagine what a nuclear war is. She's imagining the Blitz again.
yeah.
And
Okay.
oh, and just as a side note for people who are interested, that's a great segue into the film When the Wind Blows, the animated film.
Hmm.
And there's an entire element there of the elderly woman who knows that the war will be okay because Uncle Joe will save them. But of course, it's Joe Stalin that's nuking the country.
Right, right, right.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
as a
actually, I,
side
I
note.
will say that that these sorts of movies. Obviously, I hadn't seen Threads yet, but On the Beach and The Day After for sure led to one of the earliest. I don't really want to say conflicts, but breaks between my father and I when it came to something geopolitical, and that was no, Dad, I really do believe that the living will envy the dead, and I don't want to be on that side of the equation. Call me a moral coward if you must, but I grew up on military bases, and so we always just thought, let's just go out, let's go and watch the bomb. Although that's a bad idea too, because then you'll be blinded and then you'll be in a lot of pain before you die. But just don't try too hard was kind of the my Gen X philosophy when it came to trying to survive a nuclear war. You know, just gonna die tired, man.
Well, one problem, well, I actually don't know where we are in the narrative here, but one problem is that the vastness of the United States in a scenario like uh, the day after and is kind of as expanded upon and sort of fetishized in something like Red Dawn,
Hmm.
is that you can get away from it and you can survive. You can do something else to further your life and fight or create something new. Britain is so small and closed. I
Right.
think that that claustrophobia does beset Ruth as things go on. She does move to the countryside
Hmm.
and she does survive for the remaining 13 years of her life in the countryside, but that's her only escape. Is kind of, it's still under the heavy hand of the post-war government, but she kind of gets away. But there's no hopping onto a sailboat and heading to Australia. She's
Right.
stuck there forever.
Right. Yeah, and I did notice that I think it was the recommendation was that they were supposed to shelter in place for 14 days. And I think the only people that we followed that managed to make it the 14 days were the civil administration, who
Yeah,
didn't do it by choice.
right. They were
So
they
when
were
the town hall, and for the people that are following along, when the town hall collapsed on top of their shelter, they're basically now buried under a ton of rubble, and they're trying to run operations. And frankly, I mean, I got to say, kind of doing a pretty good job as far as I can tell. I mean, with what they've had to play with.
right.
You know, yeah, okay, we're shooting looters. That's not a great thing, but okay, if you can give me another, way to try and get this under control, let me know. Oh, and I think the most terrifying phrase in the whole aftermath was when one of the administrators says, "I need that food to force people to work."
Right.
And it's like, ouch, but she's totally got a point. And that
Mhm.
I always figure that when it comes down to a situation like that, I really think that order is going to break down even more than it did there, because they still managed to have a a civil authority. They still had somebody was still running the show, and they were still
Mhm.
providing services. I mean, food distribution was happening. I mean, it wasn't enough food, but oh, and then there's that terrible line about how the more people that starve to death, the more food there is for everybody else. Oh,
Right.
that's
Yeah,
bleak.
the cruel irony of that. Um, and that, yeah, that's true. And civil authority was breaking down in a uniquely British way.
Right. Yeah,
And
I think that's
yeah,
right. If
and I
that were if that were some urban America, it would have been a food wouldn't have been your major trading source. It would have been ammunition.
right, right. The
Everybody taking their own.
yeah, the most of the editions, the DVD and Blu-ray editions, uh, have the iconic cover, the same cover, and it's the traffic warden
Hmm.
guarding the impromptu prison at the tennis courts.
Right.
And that's sort of what I mean by a uniquely British way. It's obviously imprisoned all of these looters and other people who've done something, and the only guard you can find is a traffic warden, which is like a meter maid, a sort of a lesser police officer,
Right.
and they're not really knocking down those fences. They're sort of still playing the game, and I
Right.
think people continue to play the game in the film until food really becomes an issue, and that's when you get a few scenes of people being shot, looting, and when things get really bad, there's some still images of summary executions as well.
Hmm. Yeah. And I don't know why this particular scene, speaking of food running out, always sticks with me. But when they actually they eat the sheep, or
Yeah,
the ram that they come across, and they're like, "Hey, it's got a thick coat. It's probably fine."
it's a very that's a very deep scene because it deals with a few things. It deals with it deals dramatically with hunger, supplies, but also not just the fact that the sheep clearly is irradiated, but the general public misinformation or lack of education about the actual risks,
Right.
and that's something that's just buried in that scene. Bob says, you know, it's got a thick coat. It wouldn't have, it wouldn't be radiation. Ruth says, well, sheep don't die of cold.
That's right.
And he says, well, you'd be able to taste it, wouldn't you? And she says, oh, I don't know. And so there's this, that's sort of spooky, because watching that, it's like, wow, what don't I know? Or what wouldn't people know? They do eat the sheep in any case.
Right. And I mean, I can see, one, hunger. I mean, you can talk yourself into a lot of things when you're that hungry, I'm sure. And especially, again, like you said, you don't know. It's like, well, radiation, it's on the outside of the sheep, and okay, so they don't eat the lungs because it was breathing, and stay away from the GI tract because it was drinking water and eating radioactive stuff. So
Just it's an absolutely haunting scene.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just chowing down on on
Raw.
basically
Yeah.
roadkill. Yeah, that was tough. Um, but okay, so, and something that we didn't even talk about, because of the weakness of my format, was Ruth's pregnant during almost
Yeah.
probably the entire movie.
Yeah,
So
she gets pregnant in the very first scene in the car, as the first jets fly over to Finning. Or it's RAF Finningley, right?
I believe so.
And she's pregnant the entire time. In fact, the film began, that first pre-war segment. If anybody watching is interested in this type of film stuff, um, it was intentionally designed to look like a kitchen sink drama, which is sort of a working class style that was very popular at the time. So it was about a sort of semi-employed or unemployed family, kind of a class struggle working. And so, yes, the fact that she gets pregnant, she's pregnant, and Jimmy wants to do the right thing, and they try to get the apartment. All of that follows a format of something that you would have found on the BBC at any given time in the late 70s and early 80s, like on Play for Today, for instance.
So
And
it's just kind
so
of putting everybody at ease.
yeah, it's a familiar format, like a soapy format,
Mm-hmm.
that you're about to take that familiar format, that working class guy who just wants to do something or break out of his life, and you're about to just drop nuclear weapons on them. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll definitely ruin your day.
So it had sort of an additional cultural element that I think that Americans like us watching it, or maybe even Britons today, might not even
Yeah,
appreciate.
I had no idea. That's fascinating. But she actually, okay, so she's pregnant throughout the first 2/3, 3/4 of the movie. But then she does actually manage to successfully have birth or give birth in a very traumatic scene, where she's essentially all alone, and that baby was born through the grace of God and her will. Um, and so now we have something new that I don't know any other films that were dealing with this kind of World War III thing really gave us, which was the next generation. So this is a child who is born into a world that was destroyed, 8 months before she was born. And so, yeah, it really kind of sets us up to see how bad things can get. And again, like I said, when the producers were deciding how to set this up, they gave us so much time, because we would, so much. When I say time, I'm talking about they give us an hour, and to cover a lot of years. And so we do. You mentioned that Ruth made it something like 13 years.
I believe it's 13.
Yeah.
Actually, I have it. I had put this in my notes. I think it's interesting. If it's right in front of me, I think it is. Yeah, the touchstones are from the beginning: 4 months, 7 months, 10 months. This is all after the war.
Right.
After the war. 4 months, 7 months, 10 months, a year, 10 years, and 13 years. So it's a vast expanse of time.
And
Yeah.
and we watched the crop failures because of the nuclear winter. So the attack happened in the spring, and so the crops that you were expecting to get, were nowhere near what the yield would have been if they had had sunlight. And this, and I did think this was interesting. Um, they say that it was because of dwindling fuel supplies. This is the last time that they're going to have tractors and harvesters to bring in the crop. And part of me was wondering at the time, and I guess you can't think that far in the future, but um, wouldn't it have been more efficient to save that for the next season? But then if everybody dies this season because they can't get enough food, you don't really have a choice.
It is, it's interesting because uh, in everything I've looked into, both related to the film and just related to this kind of post attack planning, nobody plans that far ahead.
Right. Yep.
Nobody planned that far
Yep.
ahead. And especially in Britain, there's very specific plans, and they're represented in the film. Very specific plans for the immediate post-attack period, and so you see grain depots guarded, you see food depots guarded. Things are distributed at least semi-efficiently, but after that first year, there is just absolutely no planning
Right.
in the United States or in Britain. And as far as I know, I've never heard of anything in the Soviet Union. But of course, it's a different discipline entirely to try to crack
Sure.
their archives. Yeah.
And so she gives birth, and then we get so yeah, she lived for 13 years. And then her daughter goes on, and I know I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but we are kind of running short. But her daughter goes on to show us what the civilization kind of looks like as she's coming of age. And the thing that I found most fascinating, and I believe in 100%, is the degradation of language in the next generation. Without any formal schooling, without any structured education, there's no way the language is gonna hold for very long. So I really
Yeah.
liked that aspect of it. I
Mm-hmm.
know a lot of people, when I'm talking to them about this, they kind of blow that off and think that it was a little over the top. But no, I believe it 100%. Especially now that I'm older, and I was a Russian linguist for the Navy, and I can't speak a damn word, or okay, I can speak some, but I can hardly speak the language at all because I haven't been using it. And so I can 100% see the language just going down incredibly fast like that.
Yeah. That's a great point. I think that it was a fair point that the filmmakers made, that Barry Hines, the writer, he included it for a reason. It's it's very difficult to watch the film and understand exactly how specific the degradation is. If you get the screenplay, which is available on Amazon, I've never seen an online version. But if you get the screenplay, you can actually read what's being said in the interaction between Ruth's daughter and Gaz and the two boys,
Mm-hmm.
one of whom becomes the father of her child in that barn. And you realize that they are speaking English, and it's not that far off, but they're using Sheffield and Yorkshire slang.
Yeah, were they referring to rabbits as conies? Is that right?
Conies, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're talking about the rabbit, and everything's just sort of this slang. And so it makes a I think it's a good argument for the way that it was written, if you can actually read it and say, oh yeah, that just makes more sense. It's not something totally absurd. I think it's important, or might be notable for people watching, to point out the book Ridley Walker at this point. Ridley Walker, uh, I off the top of my head, I don't remember the can't remember the author. Anyway, the entire book is written in um in a sort of failed lesser English after a nuclear war.
Oh wow.
So and and it's really worth looking at for that reason. Yeah,
Yeah,
really well.
that makes sense. I think maybe it's because of my background in foreign languages, but I really didn't have that hard of a time following them.
Yeah,
I could see where they were going. I could use context clues. Um, but so yeah, then that really kind of ushers us in. You mentioned that one of those fine gentlemen became a father, sort of. Um,
indeed.
in what is definitely the most disturbing aspect of the whole movie, and that is that Ruth's granddaughter. Actually, we don't know if it's a boy or a girl. I don't think. Ruth's
We don't.
grandchild is stillborn, and it's definitely one of the most traumatic. So in a movie that is just one bummer after another. This is absolutely the cherry on top, the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. And so it's not explicitly said whether the entire next generation would be infertile, but you have to believe that fertility rates are going to take a huge hit, just because the body is fighting off, the after effects of radiation and malnutrition and, a whole host of comorbidities that are just going to absolutely wreck
Mhm.
fertility. So
Yeah, it's the reality of mutation rather than the science fiction thrill of mutation.
that's right. No X-Men were born that day.
No, not at all. And indeed, we're not entirely sure that Ruth's daughter is stillborn. I want to point that out. It's never clear. It may simply be that it's a completely um, insensitive breathing lump of tissue
I had
because
not
of
thought
the
of that.
way that the nurse bundles it and and leaves the face exposed. Eh, I've done a lot of thinking about it, especially in the way that the actress portrays the horror of seeing the child.
Mm-hmm.
It is it's it's just meant to instill uncertainty, and it does that uncertainty and terror. Yeah,
I had
because
not
remember, mhm,
considered that. That's a very interesting point.
the of course it's we should remember that Ruth's daughter, is intellectually impaired because of radiation in utero,
Sure. I mean, yeah,
probably,
the
along with other things, malnutrition in utero, and so she's going to pass on some other issues. But she's lived her entire life in an environment of heightened radiation. It
right,
just becomes completely uncertain what effects that's going to have. And remember, this is concentrated. This isn't someone living out in the American plains that can kind of get away from it only when the wind blows in a certain way. These
right.
these people are on the island of Britain, completely inundated in the effects of the Third World War.
Yeah, it's very sobering. It really is, especially in today's political climate, where for the first time in 30 years, we're taking it very seriously again. So I think that just and I realize we're kind of skipping the tropes, but to be honest, we've already kind of talked about them. They're sprinkled in throughout the review. So I think that would probably be a good idea to kind of bring this to a close on that, and to say, um, if you're at all concerned about a nuclear exchange, I 100% recommend you watch this movie. It's not going to be a good time. It's definitely not a Friday night family movie, but it is a realistic depiction of what something like this could look like. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we have not improved, I don't think, our civil. The only difference between now and then is that we're all going to get a text message before the first one goes off.
If you're
That's the real
lucky.
improvement, because we certainly aren't going to be running off to our fallout shelters. You know,
No.
and I can't imagine that FEMA's been taking this particularly seriously. since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So
No, there's no civil defense program. There's no central authority that can deal with it in the United States, at least. If anything like that were to happen, you'd be very much on your own. I think the first time I really, really thought about that deeply was Katrina, and I
yeah,
realized how impotent FEMA really had become
right.
since FEMA had inherited the mantle of civil defense, the Civil Defense Administration, and all of its precursor organizations. And I realized that they could barely hand out MREs.
They can
So
barely get water bottles out of a warehouse.
you're not going to get any help.
Nope.
No.
So again, embrace the blast wave. And well, I tell you what, Dr. Kinney, it was great talking to you. I've really enjoyed this. I hope we can do it again sometime.
I'd love to. I could talk another hour just on the science of threads and how accurate the science was and how the filmmakers integrated that. So it's really a
Yeah,
fascinating
I would
film and
absolutely take you up on that. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and leave a link to your podcast in the description of this video.
Okay.
And see, there we go. I'm strangling a cat again. The podcast is the Cold War Vault. This is Dr. DJ Kinney. It's one of my favorite podcasts, so go give it a listen. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Good night.